Welcome to Pilgrim in the Metaverse, an exploration of extended reality through the lenses of philosophy and education. Through each episode, I offer an introspective reflection about my encounters with immersive experiences, including video games and publications about augmented, mixed, and virtual reality. My name is Csaba Osvath. Thank you for joining me. I concluded the last episode with a quote from Jaron Lanier about what makes something real, and I wanted to further explore questions and ideas about reality in the context of XR technologies. However, my plan was disrupted and changed by an email from a student in my online class. She reached out in despair, and her words carried both frustration and anger, stemming from the recent events surrounding the murder of George Floyd and the underlying trauma caused by institutional and systemic racism, injustice, violence, and the widening inequality that's destroying the possibility of an equitable and just society. And my students are right when they are asking us to be more than just thought leaders, and not to limit ourselves to academic influence only, but to become role models and mentors to them. And the following questions from her email are important. How are we supporting our Black students? What resources have we offered them? Have we contacted every single one of them asking what they need from us, or asking how we may best support them? And I need to ask these questions from myself. How am I working with my non-Black colleagues and students to remind them that inherent bias runs deep and that we are each responsible for unlearning racism? How am I addressing systemic racism, or how am I working toward anti-racism in my life and teaching? And because this podcast is about extended reality technologies, I want to explore and reflect on these issues while considering what XR or my engagements with immersive experiences can do to dismantle and eradicate racism and violence. So perhaps revisiting Lanier's quote about reality is a good starting point. In the dawn of the new everything, he wrote, "Something is real only when it is also experienced by other people, and not just as a movie, but as a world to be explored, as a world that anyone might change, because shared consequence, the shared experience of change, is what makes a world real." Indeed, we need changes in the real world, so the question of how XR technologies can contribute to a better reality is important. And like Lanier, I am actually more interested in what happens when I put down the headset and re-enter the real world, because I don't want to see these virtual experiences as an alternative to life, but rather as tools and resources to cultivate a more engaged and purposeful life outside of the headset. But virtual reality, with its powerful sensory immersion, has this ability to put our greatest concerns literally on our face. And when you are wearing a VR or mixed reality headset, it facilitates full immersion into a singular experience. There are no incoming calls, text messages, no multitasking, no distractions. VR forces us to pay attention to one thing at a time, one experience at a time. And yes, VR achieves this as a kind of cognitive con, fooling our brains and bodies to think and experience that a virtual encounter is real and it is happening to us. For this reason, VR can be approached as one potential tool and a storytelling medium that can allow us to experience someone else's suffering and to cultivate empathetic connections. Having these powerful experiences in VR has been instrumental for me to work against my own racist tendencies and prejudice against Blacks and those whose differences in skin color or values generate discomfort. And it is not easy to acknowledge my own racism and my tendency to embrace tribalism over a conscious effort to protect and support diversity and multiculturalism. But this is the only valid starting point for me, to recognize and acknowledge my own shortcomings, and to keep alive a desire for change. And the kind of change I desire starts with making real connections. Connections with others and connections with powerful narratives. And virtual reality has an important role in this. Many people see VR as a tool to cultivate empathy, but I think what VR does is to foster intimacy, or amplifying the emotional depth of our engagements. And it is important to differentiate empathy from intimacy. I think intimacy always depends on another person, or to use Lanier's words, it thrives on shared experiences. And what's powerful about VR is that this feeling of intimacy can be achieved even without the physical presence of another person. When I first started watching VR documentaries, such as Traveling While Black or Clouds Over Sidra, I immediately noticed the degree of emotional connection and the magnitude of affection I felt towards the characters and their stories. It often goes beyond empathy or the ability to feel with and feeling for another person. Intimacy makes that other person into a kin or a partner. There is bond, interdependence. And without genuine affection, intimacy and love, I doubt if we can ever change the ways we relate to others or the quality of those relationships. This is why I continue to stress that matters of the heart or cultivating emotional intelligence, self-understanding, and the compassionate living must become an integral part of school curriculums and general education. We do a relatively good job tending the intellect, but I think we are failing when it comes to educating the heart, and if I may add, cultivating the soul. If nothing more, VR can shake us up or wake us up to experience the struggles and pain of others in new ways. For example, Ali Aslami's project, DeathTolls Experience, helped me to reawaken to the reality of human loss in the Middle East. In the news and publications, we acknowledge statistics, but we rarely have an emotional reaction, or we choose not to linger and see individual human beings beyond those numbers. We are desensitized by the news and information overload bombarding us from all directions. But in Aslami's project, it is impossible not to feel the grief and the constructive pain that will shift our attitudes and open up new possibilities to act or engage. In a sense, this is a phenomenal data visualization project, and perhaps we need to begin using Aslami's work as a template to help people make sense of our cold and impersonal data. According to Mapping Police Violence, more than 1,000 unarmed people died as a result of police harm between 2013 and 2019. About a third of them were black. About 17% of the black people who died as a result of police harm were unarmed, a larger share than any other racial group, and about 1.3 times more than the average of 13%. When we read these numbers on the pages of a newspaper, or as the fast-paced news ticker floating by on a screen, we may take notice but are rarely moved. But what if you put on your VR headset and, like in the DeathTolls Experience, you actually see body bags or the headstones in a cemetery with all the images of these fellow humans? As a privileged white male, I doubt I will ever experience anything close or similar to the encounters of blacks, men, women and children with police or racist individuals or institutions. But if I am unaware of or unmoved by these encounters, then I will never change my own attitudes or eliminate my own biases and work toward the possibility of an anti-racist society. But XR is not a magic solution. Putting on a headset and experiencing an immersive documentary such as Traveling While Black will not solve racism in America. I deeply resonate with the African-American scholar Rudine Sims Bishop, who is often referred to as the mother of multicultural children's literature. She writes that literature, no matter how powerful, has its limits. It won't take the homeless off our street. It won't feed the starving of the world. It won't stop people from attacking each other because of our racial difference. It won't stamp out the scourge of drugs. It could, however, help us to understand each other better by helping to change our attitudes toward difference. And VR has a valuable advantage regarding the facilitation of understanding and the creation of empathetic connections with others. For example, experiencing Derek Ham's project, I'm a Man, offered new and profound ways to become more than a passive observer of the historic events of the African American civil rights movement. Yes, it was shocking to find myself in a city alley in Memphis, surrounded by garbage cans. It was shocking and disorienting to look at my hands with dark skin, no longer pale, no longer soft but black and hardened by manual labor. It was hard not to cry as the garbage truck was backing up towards me with a painful Negro spiritual reminding me of a reality I never lived. I didn't want to lift up and empty the garbage bins or pick up the trash I spilled. Get me out of here was my first reaction, and I had to restart this experience several times because I couldn't go through it. And I think this is the key. Not what VR offers as an experience, rather how we are willing to experience or willing to make sense of the experiences VR provides. To return to it, even if it causes discomfort or pain, to stay with it and question our emotions, reactions, and interpretations. And to return to Dr. Bishop, she also points out that when we are part of a dominant social group, we mostly engage with stories by this dominant social group. And these stories, unlike I'm a Man, we only discover ourselves in the characters who look like us and often share the same values. But at the same time, we suffer, even if we are unaware of it, from the lack of stories about others. We all need stories, to use Bishop metaphors, not just as mirrors, seeing ourselves, but as windows onto reality. We need stories that will help us to understand the multicultural nature of the world we live in and our place and connections to all other humans. And this is when stories may become, according to Bishop, sliding glass doors, so we can transition from a story into a lived experience, where we are compelled to act and cultivate the conditions for a harmonious coexistence in a society that values and celebrates diversity. But it is impossible to celebrate and embrace diversity when we don't see value in it, or when we are unwilling to explore and acknowledge the value of otherness and the values of others. And this takes effort as well as a disciplined practice. In I Am a Man, there is a powerful scene after the assassination of Dr. King. Through VR, I was on a Memphis street. On a TV set in a storefront window, I was watching and listening to President Kennedy addressing the nation about the murder of Dr. King. And suddenly, a police car approached, and I was blinded by the lights. Officers were yelling at me to put my hands up. And that moment, the first time when I tried this experience, I realized that I had no fear. Not because the scene wasn't compelling, but because I had no idea what it means to be a black individual who is approached by the police. So I kept reading about experiences about black people and police violence, and I kept returning to this VR experience until finally I could experience this formerly unknown gut reaction of dread and fear for my life. And again, due to my skin color and privilege, I probably will never have to experience or endure a violent encounter with police officers. But if I am unwilling to consciously pursue these empathetic connections, or if I refuse to have at least a faint understanding of what others experience, then things will never change, because change starts with me. And violence also has to stop with me, within me, and through me. And VR inspires me to action. Every time I revisit the experience traveling while Black, I feel closer to the African American community because through this VR documentary, I get to be a guest. I am sitting with Blacks at the table and I can listen deeply. And what's remarkable about this production, or the power of VR, that no matter how many times I watch this, my emotional reaction and the corresponding tears never seem to lessen or become diminished. I already mentioned the powerful effect of body transfer in VR, and right now this is the only medium that allows us to look into a mirror and see another being or learn to move through space as another creature. In NeuroSpeculative AfroFeminism, an experience created by Hyphen Labs, I was transported into a futuristic beauty salon. I was sitting in a swivel chair, and as soon as I spun around and looked into the mirror, it was not my reflection, but a young Black girl's. It is difficult to find words to describe this feeling, but I am grateful for the new kind of emotions as well as the shocking confusion to see a young Black girl looking back at me when I stare into the mirror. I don't know if I can make sense of this experience or if I can articulate what it was like to travel through a psychedelic Afrofuturist landscape where I encountered strange beings whose presence was empowering and also deeply loving. But for me, seeking out these experiences are instrumental to dismantle my own biases and to challenge my own assumptions. But to return to our current situation and the killing of George Floyd and many other Black individuals by police, it is necessary to talk about a VR experience about police and policing. If we want a constructive police reform and restore the dignity of this profession, we need to understand the complexity of this line of work. And Dispatch by Edward Rubels offers a unique approach to experience policing in a fictional town. This is a powerful, immersive experience where one can be transported through sounds and stylized visuals into a complex and traumatic story. Ted, the protagonist, is a young white man in a wheelchair who works the stressful job of a police dispatcher in a clearly understaffed and underfunded police department. And it is impossible not to feel the agony of the strains and difficulties of his job and the job of the officers. It seems that the police are always behind and always late for the crime, unable to prevent the violence or resolve the conflict. And I could sense the raw emotions of anger rising from this constant defeat and sense of failure. So what happens with people in this line of work? It is undeniable that this profession changes people, some for the worst, but some for the better. And in Dispatch we also witness the self-sacrifice of a young man, his kindness toward a stranger. And maybe this is a worthy pursuit, to strive for the actualization of kindness towards others. As I mentioned, this episode was inspired by a student's email, and a few days ago I received another message from Krista Tippett from On Being Studios. She writes, "Here in Minneapolis, the street corner where George Floyd died with a police officer's knee on his neck has become a sacred space of neighborliness, protest, bearing witness, lament, eating, bicycle repair, praying, mural making, and singing. An alternative landscape of care has risen up amidst burned down buildings, and it is teeming with young people. These pictures are not shown as constantly by drones and journalistic cameras as the pictures of destruction, but they are as true and they matter as much. what is not covered seriously enough by journalism in crisis mode is often precisely what can save us, the redemptive landscape on which the work of the rest of our lifetimes is emerging. As I read this, I believe that extended reality may become a new medium to create and inhabit such redemptive landscapes, a safe space where we can practice compassion and learn more about the art of living together with and through our differences. And I am calling on Black artists, engineers, developers, storytellers to work with this technology and teach, inspire, and help us to unlearn racism. I see myself as a pilgrim whose desire and goal is to inner transformation through a sacred journey. And as a pilgrim in the Metaverse, I am reminded of the words of Malcolm X, whose life changed radically after his pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca. He writes, "On this pilgrimage, what I have seen and experienced has forced me to rearrange much of my thought patterns previously held and to toss aside some of my previous conclusions. This was not difficult for me. Despite my firm convictions, I have been always a man who tries to face facts and to accept the reality of life as new experience and new knowledge unfolds it. I have always kept an open mind, which is necessary to the flexibility that must go hand in hand with every form of intelligent search for truth." And Malcolm X realized that the real problem in America was the political, economic, and social atmosphere that nourishes a racist psychology in the white man. And to reform and redesign these complex systems and to create a new psychological foundation that promotes a compassionate coexistence, it will require the work of all of us. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Yours virtually, Csaba.